Hello, winos, and welcome to our episode on ability bias. Now, the one thing that we love about Wine with HR is that we pair workplace headaches with practical HR advice. A little bit of wine to help take the edge off, or maybe a lot of wine. Depends on the episode, depends on the
I was
day.
just going to say a little bit of wine. Today, we are talking about ability bias at work, and we're calling it that because really the vast majority of us are biased for or towards ability, not disability. So as a result, the challenges that individuals can face, well, they're differently abled, right? And so because of that, oftentimes those differences don't even occur to us, or the challenges they face may not even occur to us.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about implicit bias in just a few minutes, but this is a big one because there really is this, and we have stats about this, so I won't spoil those now, but this sort of implicit bias is a really tough one to even uncover because most of us don't encounter the particularly physical challenges on a day-to-day basis. And so it can be really hard for us to put ourselves in someone else's position and actually see those. Of course, in HR, disability bias or ability bias can show up in all sorts of different ways in recruiting, hiring, interviews, your company events that you hold, trainings, holiday parties, performance reviews, promotions, and leadership pipelines. So today we're going to be kind of looking at all of those and giving you a checklist for spotting bias before it becomes an issue. Particularly, of course, we always want to avoid charges or lawsuits, but even more importantly, not being cognizant of the challenges that our differently abled employees face can really erode trust and that feeling of inclusion and belonging that we talk about so often.
Incredibly important topics. But before we dive in, you know what time it is. It's time for the wine. So, Julie, what are you drinking?
Today, I am very excited because I found an Etna Rosato from, shocker, I know, Italy. But so this is
What?
it. Yeah, I know. So this is a rosé, but isn't that fun? A Rosato from the Etna region, which is the volcanic region. So it's got, rosé and the minerality of the volcanic region. So,
Very
so far, I
nice.
had one little itty bitty sip, which wasn't enough to even fully appreciate. So, hold please. I really like that. It is, you know how sometimes rosés can be sweet? This is not
Yes.
one of those. It's not even remotely sweet. It is definitely a dry rosé, and it has that finish of that minerality, that volcanic. You can almost taste the lava or the magma, I guess,
Ooh.
in maybe the flint. Does it turn into flint when it cools? I don't know. Whatever. I'm just making crap up right now, but I really like it. You, Trish, what are you drinking?
I decided to go with an old favorite, a red zin. So I
Oh,
do love old red zins, and this one is an old vine red zin. It's from a company called Predator, and it's really super cool. You guys, Julie's shaking her head if you could see her. Yes, it's awesome, right? Has a little ladybug on the label, and it says, "What's good for the vine is good for the wine," and I
ah,
really like. I love the back of the bottle doesn't really give you a lot of information about the taste, but what it does talk about is how ladybugs can be used to prevent predation of your fruits, your vegetables, etc., because they are natural predators of so many of those bugs that eat our food. So they use that to control versus pesticides and things like that. So very, very cool. The flavors, shock of all shocks, there's a lot of blackberry in there and spice. So you know me, I love the wines that have that kind of fruity mouthfeel with a spicy end. Definitely can taste it. The black pepper, it's not just oak, it's kind of like a smoky oak, if you will. So for me, this is an absolute win.
It sounds like it. Now, does the name Predator, because I'm assuming they make other wines, it doesn't have anything to do with the movie? I
I
was
don't
like,
think so.
I was like, that'd be a nice follow up to our Jaws episode.
Oh, it would totally. Yes, I do not think it has anything to do. Although I don't know if you were a small creature and you looked at the mouth of a ladybug coming at you, it may be quite similar to the predator. I don't know.
I will
So.
say I have never thought of a ladybug as a predator. So,
Right? That's what was so cool about it. We don't
yeah,
typically think of it that way. So,
yeah,
yeah, I was really
yeah,
excited.
yeah. Okay. All right. Well, you know what that means, Trish. You know what time it is?
That time!
It's
Get the jazz
that
hands going.
time.
Okay, I of course love stat time. These are a little sobering though when we talk about our statistics. So let's jump right in. In 2024, the US Bureau of Labor Statistics actually reported that the employment population ratio for people with a disability was only 22.7%, compared with 65.5% for those who do not have a disability. This is completely disheartening. But also, can we say that we're super surprised based on the fact that we didn't even get the ADA until 1990 and then took 20 years after that to get the Amendments Act? I can't say I'm surprised. I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and that gap in the percentages is the reason why this episode matters. Now, while it is true that not everyone who is disabled can actually work, that difference is still so large. And it doesn't account for like the small percentage of people who cannot work at all, does not account for that large of a gap in the percentage. Unlike with our other protected classes like race, gender, ethnicity, national origin, color, etc., when it comes to our differently abled employees, equal treatment is not enough. In fact, as we will talk about throughout this episode, you sometimes do have to treat your differently abled employees more favorably than you would a non-disabled employee in order to make it a level playing field. By giving them accommodations, you may be treating them differently than you're treating other employees. And in this particular case, that's not only legal, it's very important. So we'll get into that more in a few minutes. But the biggest thing to keep in mind when we're talking during this episode is that we are a very, as Trisha mentioned at the beginning, a very ableist minded society. And so a lot of times it really is hard for us to recognize the challenges that disabled individuals or differently abled individuals have to face on a daily basis. And so it just doesn't even occur to us to think of them when we're planning things. And as HR professionals, we really need to be more cognizant of that and do a better job of it.
I fully agree. Let's talk about Jan. And by Jan, I am talking about the Job Accommodation Network. We're not talking about
Oh,
someone behind their back.
or I was going to say the Brady Bunch,
Yes,
Jan.
no Brady Bunch here.
Yep.
Job Accommodation Network. They give us another practical stat. They said that 61% of accommodations with cost information actually cost nothing to implement. And those accommodations with a one time expense had a median cost of around $300. So everybody start thinking about what we talk about when we talk about, is this an undue burden? Think about the cost, right? We think about how it's going to affect our business or the way we do business. So $300 for most of us, not that much. So our default reaction then, not just HR, but everyone should be not to panic. The better default is curiosity. What is the barrier? What is the essential function that we need to help them perform? What would allow that person to participate or perform, if you will? So, really, what we want to focus on is inclusion, disability inclusion. It's not just about our legal compliance, right? Okay, yes, we all want to be in compliance, but we really need to take it beyond that legal compliance and really focus on talent. It's a talent issue, it's a culture issue. Honestly, it's also a systems design issue.
Yeah, so before we get into talking about the specific areas where this is most likely to come up for our HR professionals and managers, I want us, Trisha and I, to take a minute to set the foundation and talk about implicit bias. You guys have heard us talk about this before, but we're specifically talking about it with respect to ability bias because I think that this is a really important conversation for some of the reasons we've already said. But over one third of people tend to think of disabled individuals as less productive, just simply by virtue of the fact that they're disabled. Implicit bias against disabled individuals is higher than against any other group. So, again, any of our other protected classes: race, color, religion, national origin, gender, etc. An earnings disparity of over $10,000 between those with and without disabilities has existed since at least 2008. So, can you imagine making $10,000 less just simply because you have a condition that leaves you with physical or mental challenges? Last quick stat I'll give you, and then we'll talk a little bit more about this as well. But a study highlighted by the American Bar Association found that implicit disability bias has only shifted towards neutrality by 3% over the last 14 years. And that is compared to, while they didn't give the exact numbers, more significant changes in biases related to race and sexuality. So, again, this is a very slow moving and very sort of strongly entrenched implicit bias.
A couple of really interesting points from the article that Julie just mentioned. Uh, this is one of those cases where we actually are more likely to judge the frequency, likelihood, or as they say, typicality on examples that come to mind. Now, what the heck do they mean by that? Well, what we're talking about is this. If you have experience with a person or have recently had an experience with a person, instead of putting that person and looking at them as an individual, you will now take that experience and judge all others based on that one experience that you had. Apparently, my dogs agree. I don't know if you can hear them, but they are like, yes, this is the truth. So, what we're talking about here is known as availability bias. Now, for instance, if a hiring partner can quickly recall a few instances where a disabled employee needed an accommodation, that partner may overestimate how common or significant accommodations may be. So, availability bias can shape those initial impressions. Now, think about then how that is going to impact people's ability to get jobs, but it also then will reinforce existing impressions. Which reminds me, we might as well talk about confirmation bias. Hey, Jules?
Yep. Yep, the double whammy of bias.
It truly, truly is. So think about this confirmation bias. We tend to interpret or recall information in ways that confirm the way we already think. So if you believe someone isn't going to be as strong in their job based on what you believe are past experiences, then you are going to assign those same attributes to this person. And whether they are doing their job correctly or not, you could say something like, oh, gee, look, here is a perfect example of what I was talking about in the first place, even though if someone else might have made that same mistake or omitted something or added something, you never would have thought that. So it is looking for ways to confirm those pre-existing assumptions while discounting or overlooking any sort of information or evidence to the contrary. Again, as I said, this is known as confirmation bias.
Yeah, so that's all setting the foundation because which is really important for a discussion like this because that's all at play in the background of all of our minds. Again, those stats that we shared at the beginning, pretty much all of us have some sort of ability bias. So we need to be cognizant of it and work very actively to try to catch it. So, a couple of ways you can catch it real quick before we get into the specifics about interviewing and hiring, company functions, and some evaluations, promotions, etc. You can ask yourself and the others on the hiring committee or the others that are sitting in the room when you're making decisions about an employee's career path. You can ask some of these questions. There are seven. I'm not going to go through all seven for time purposes, but as always, we will post the link in the show notes. This is from the American Bar Association article. So the first one is when you think about a person with a disability, what is the first thing that tends to come to mind? Is it their abilities, their limitations, or something else? Where do you think that initial focus comes from? So, again, a lot of this is going to be from your experiences growing up. Like if you had someone in your family or in your close circle that did have a disability, you might have a very different view of things than if you have not had that experience. So maybe it's just things, characters you've seen on TV or, whatever the case may be. So then the next one I'm going to give you is the second question, which is think about where most of your knowledge about disability comes from. Is it personal relationships, the media, education, work experiences, news stories, et cetera, et cetera? And how might those sources shape your assumptions? So, again, these are just two examples of questions that you could ask in a room full of people or when you're evaluating candidates for a particular position or you're evaluating candidates for a promotion. If you hear somebody talking in a way that sort of gives you an idea that they might have an ability bias, you could ask these questions to flesh out where that information is coming from. So now let's kind of get into the areas where this is most likely to come up. So the first one is interviewing and hiring. And the idea for this episode actually came because Brenna had found a post on a social media platform where a candidate was talking about her experience where she voluntarily disclosed that she had a disability during an interview and then was completely ghosted. Now, obviously, that's bad practice all the way around. Ghosting candidates in particular, for whatever reason, is not great practice. Also one of Trisha's huge pet peeves. But for somebody who has had the courage to disclose something that they know may, unfortunately, put them at a disadvantage, and then to just never hear from the company again is going to set that company up for potential legal liability, but also just an icky feeling from that candidate and anybody she or he shares that story with. So that's kind of where we're starting. Trisha, what are some other things that you think would help employers and HR professionals to better focus the interview? if they are, they do have an employee who discloses that they have a disability, or perhaps it is obvious that the person has some sort of disability. Um, what what are your some of your suggestions for employers in that situation?
My suggestion is always to focus on the essential functions of the job. And if someone does disclose a disability, I say, well, I appreciate you sharing that with me. But at this point, let's not even focus on that. Let's really focus on the job functions and see if your skills are a match. So I will acknowledge that they said it, but I will not dwell on it. I think that is an important thing because you don't just want to like move forward and be like, la 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 la, I did not hear that, because people are going to be like, are you kidding me? You're not even going to acknowledge that. But if you dwell on it too much, then you can get, of course, in trouble for that as well. Really focusing on those essential job functions. Again, can they do them with or without an accommodation? Do not get hung up on what that accommodation might look like, right? It's a really simple question. Just asking them, could you do this essential function with or without this accommodation? That is really enough. And then just a quick reminder to everybody out there, you are not supposed to ask questions about medical history. You are not supposed to ask, so how did you become disabled? So like how often do you have to go get treatment? Like those first of all, none ya business. That is one of my favorite things to say. Like, okay, I know that for a lot of our HR professionals out there, I'm getting all amped up. Y'all know this, but have you talked to your hiring managers or anyone else involved in the process? Do they understand that they're not supposed to ask about these things? They're not supposed to ask about medication. They're not supposed to ask about how much time someone is taken off. Really and truly, your focus should be, can they do the job? Period. Because the rest of it, you don't, I don't want to sound like a jerk here, and I'm going to sound like a jerk, but you don't care. You don't care how their disability affects them outside of the workplace. It's none of your business.
Yep. 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 Also, be careful, when you hear, and we've talked about this on other episodes, but particularly if you do have a candidate who is or has a disability, be careful of other people in the hiring process using terms like they're just not a good fit, they don't have the right energy, those kinds of things that scream implicit bias, unless
I
you
just
can.
want to do what's best for the company.
Right, right, yes.
Oh,
So unless
biggest red flag.
you can always follow that up with, what makes you say that? Give me objective reasons for why you are saying that, to try to, again, flesh out whether this is an implicit bias thing or if there is an actual legitimate reason for, whatever they are saying. The other thing I just want to point out, so this is the lawyer in me coming out, but as Trisha mentioned, if somebody does voluntarily disclose a disability during the interview process, the best way to respond is exactly how she said, which is, you know what, I really appreciate you sharing that with me. That's not something that we consider at this point. If you are the candidate that is selected, then we will be happy to discuss potential accommodations with you and make sure we find the right one, if that is necessary. And then that's kind of the end of it. And then you want to document that they voluntarily disclosed and what your response was. If you were the only person in that interview, do not share that with anybody else.
Nope.
We do not want to unfairly taint somebody else's view of this person, because again, we already know that most of us have an ability bias, so we don't want to give anybody a heads up like, oh, this person has a disability, because then they might make all sorts of assumptions that are going to be problematic down the line. So the best thing to do is acknowledge it in the moment, thank them for telling us, say that that is something we will address later on if they are the candidate that is selected, But if they should need any accommodation throughout the application or interview process, that they just need to let you in HR know, and only you in HR, and that we will address that as necessary.
Well, and I think that that becomes a huge thing because of something that you already mentioned earlier, but I feel like it bears repeating now, which is that immediately someone is going to go to past experiences and they're going to say, oh, every time I have to hire someone with a disability, it's so much more work. They're always missing time. They're always this, they're always that. And that's not true. That may be your experience with one person. By taking that and trying to put that on everyone else, everyone else's disability, every disability is different. Even if you and I and 10 other people have the same disability, the way it impacts us may be different, and the way it impacts our job may be different. So we really do need to be aware of how we're speaking and what we're speaking to.
Yes, and you just gave me an excuse to use one of my favorite words, which you don't get to use very often. So you don't want to take one exact example and extrapolate it. Good word. I don't know why.
Yes.
Hundreds of examples. The other thing I just wanted to remind everybody about, I believe we have said this on a prior episode, but what is it, Trisha? 85% of disabilities are non-apparent or invisible. I think it's somewhere right around
I
there.
think
Like it's
it's
a
right around
very,
there. It's
very high
super, super
percentage.
high. Yep.
Yeah. So, you guys have heard me make reference to some of my health challenges. I would absolutely qualify as an individual with a disability under the ADA. But you wouldn't know it to look at me unless you knew a lot of my medical history, which sadly some of you do.
Interestingly enough.
We're
But
open books here on Wine with HR.
that we are. And I think actually you made another really good point, and something that I like to talk about in my classes as well, which is exactly that. If you are the one who's saying, oh, well, here this person comes in, they have an obvious physical disability. And so you say to them something like, well, you need an accommodation for any part of this application process. But you don't say it to someone like Julie who comes in who doesn't have the apparent disability. Oops.
Yep.
You have now just treated this person differently. And so you do not know. You don't know what you don't know. So you
Yep.
either offer it to every single person, or you don't offer it to anyone and let them say something to you like, I need an accommodation for taking this test, as an example.
Yep. So that's a very good point. Okay, so now we're going to turn to company functions, and I'm going to share a personal embarrassing story. So this is way back in like my first real full-time job out of college. Okay, so I worked at the YWCA. I ran a summer camp for at-risk youth in Michigan, and well intended, I was trying to introduce them to people and experiences that they did not have access to. And so I had invited somebody to come speak to them about disabilities. This was an individual who was in a wheelchair, and he had like special controls in his car so he could drive with his hands. And he was the nicest, most gracious man because I totally screwed this up. So,
Oh,
what we
I
were
love
talking
this.
about at the beginning about if you yourself are not physically challenged, you just don't think about how somebody who is interacts with the world. And so, what happened is this gentleman gets to the YWCA and he gets there and he gets out of his car, and all of a sudden, I realize we didn't have an elevator. We had two or three steps to get up into the building. We had no way for him to get inside the building. And it didn't even occur to me till he had showed up. And I was so embarrassed, but I took it, I used it as a learning opportunity for everybody. I fully owned what I had done at the age of, Well, how old were we when we graduated from college? 22, whatever it was.
21, 22.
21.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Some of us are a little bit younger. Keep rubbing
I'm
it
a
in,
little
Trisha.
younger. I'm just going to keep reminding you that.
Yeah. So, but oh dear Lord, I couldn't have screwed that up worse if I had tried. But I did. I turned it into a learning moment. I fully owned it. I said, you know what? This is a perfect example. I didn't even think about the fact that there's no way to get in the building for somebody who's in a wheelchair. And like I said, this man was so gracious. I wish I could remember his name, but it was many, many years ago. And so we did the session with him out in the parking lot. It happened to be a beautiful day. He took us and showed us his car and the controls and
Oh,
like,
that's so cool.
yes, I mean, so again, he gets all the props for still like for handling this with the grace he did. But in many ways, I think it was an even more important lesson for those kids who were anywhere from 6 to 15, and even the teenagers who worked with me to see my mistake. Like
Yeah.
that probably left a bigger impact, but I'm telling you, you don't want to be that person because it was super, super not only embarrassing, but God, did I just feel terrible. Like just it just didn't even occur to me at 22 years old in my invincible days, so with company functions, I tell that story for a reason. With company functions, you got to be really mindful. Like, you don't want to say, we're going to have a team building experience at the skydiving place. If you have people who have physical challenges or limitations and can't participate in that. You don't want to have something on the second floor if you don't have an easy way for people to get to the second floor.
But don't automatically assume they can't participate either, because
Right.
I know there are disabled individuals in wheelchairs that do skydive. So, like, again, that's something that we've talked about. Don't just make assumptions and say, oh, no, this one person won't be able to. I got to do something different. Like, ask them, have a conversation, like Julie and I are always saying.
Or call the skydiving place before you even like, and just say, what kind of accommodations can you make for people with physical challenges, or mental. Like it could also be any sort of like for people who get overstimulated. Like I've never been to a skydiving place, so I don't know like what the those, but if they have like bright lights or strobe lights or anything
Oh,
like that, like
typically
these are
not.
all okay. But these are all kinds of
But,
things like we need to think about, so if
right.
you're thinking about like, oh, let's go someplace cool and do something unique for our company party or team building activity, that's all great and wonderful. Just you really got to think it through from all angles, including how to be able to accommodate people who might have challenges with whatever that activity is. And also, as Tricia said, having conversations with those individuals. If you do want to pursue it, maybe talking to them first and saying, hey, we're thinking about doing this, but we want to make sure that that is something you would be comfortable participating in. Are there accommodations you would need, et cetera, et cetera? And, just not pretending like the elephant in the room doesn't exist.
I think you also hit on something extremely important right there, which was you focused on the difference between, once again, our physical and mental disabilities. Because again, you may assume that someone can participate because they don't have the physical disability, but those mental disabilities can create just as many and sometimes even bigger challenges than the physical disability. So remember, as Julie just mentioned, that it's multifaceted. You can't just look at it from one aspect. Really have communication, talk to people. Again, I'm going to say it three different ways: communicate, talk, look into something, send them a message, do whatever you can to communicate and really make this the experience that you are intending it to be.
Yeah, like so, for example, I thought of another one. Escape rooms are a big hit now, right? And have been for the past couple of years. That could cause like severe panic inducing anxiety for somebody. So,
There's very tight spaces sometimes in the
yeah,
beginning, and
yeah. Yep. You
nope.
just gotta, so again, we're not saying you can't do those things, but just you gotta think about it sort of from all angles. And then the last thing we'll say on that note with company functions is just when in any communications about that company function, make sure you include if you need or want an accommodation, please make sure that you speak to HR so that you're giving them that opening and letting them know that accommodations are available. So they themselves are not making assumptions that, oh, I just can't do it, I won't go. And then they're going to feel left out.
So we've talked about hiring, we've talked about functions, which kind of goes to our retention idea that we always discuss. What about evaluations, performance reviews, promotions? We have to discuss that as well. One of the most important things that I think we could point to here is the same thing that we started this part of the conversation with, which is you need to have written standards. You need to have your essential functions. And then those standards and the way you apply them must be consistent. You don't say, this isn't really important. It's no big deal, and let somebody not meet that standard or maybe not do that function. Because what have you just done? You've rendered that essential function non-essential. So we do have to be very careful about that. And by the way, Julie can speak to this even more, but your non-essentials, I'm sorry, not your non-essential, your essential functions are your best defense under the ADA. If you do ultimately have to let someone go, if they cannot complete an essential function, this is an incredibly important thing to be able to rely upon. And if you have said, it's not important, whether it's in your evaluation process, your promotion process, just with a particular individual, you really have, can I say, shot yourself in the foot? I mean, I think that's what you have done. So please train your managers to separate performance facts from disability related assumptions. The best way you can do this, something Julie's already said, it's to tell you the why. Why do you think that? Defend your reason. Don't just say, as she mentioned earlier, they're not a good fit. They didn't meet their function. Why didn't they meet their function? Give me an example. That is really the best way that you can do, or you can stay in compliance. When it comes to mentorships, trainings, assignments that will allow someone to stretch and hopefully grow, travel, leadership opportunities, and maybe even that informal type of sponsorship. Are you paying attention to how those are being given out, how they are being accessed? I read this amazing article several years ago, and I think, Julie, you and I even included some of this information in an episode. It was like season 1 or season 2. And in it, the gentleman says, and I think it was part of a SHRM article ultimately, he looks around and he says, and I looked around and everybody looked like me. So everyone who was getting this mentorship, this extra training, etc., they all looked alike. So how are people getting access to this essential, all important growth opportunities, these things that they need to learn to grow with your company? So pay attention to that. And also, let me just finish with this. If a disability related limitation is affecting performance, then you really do want to consider whether an accommodation, a reasonable accommodation, would help that employee meet the standard going forward. Maybe they never asked for one, but maybe if all of a sudden this is popping up, there might be a conversation that needs to be had with HR, not with the manager.
Yes, yes, yes. Managers should never be having these conversations. Um, so two quick points, and these will be my final thoughts before we get back to the wine. So Trisha mentioned the that I could say more about whether or not somebody is able to perform the essential functions with an accommodation. So, the entire purpose of the ADA is to help that person perform the essential functions of their position with an accommodation. So, if even with an accommodation they still are not able to perform that essential function, then that is the point at which you can take some action. Of course, you always want to run that past an attorney, because you want to make sure that you are taking all of the necessary steps. Sometimes you got to go back, start the reasonable accommodation process all over again, maybe modify the accommodation, try some different accommodations. You want to give them every opportunity, but we want to make sure we're not making assumptions about their performance that are impacted because of the disability and not really related to whether or not they can perform that essential function. So that was point one. All right, so I forgot point two. Is menopause considered a disability? Because,
I don't know if it is, but it really should be.
yeah,
I
because the
mean, more and
brain
more
fog
people
is
are
real.
talking about it. Brain fog is a real thing.
It's a real thing. So anyway, I don't know. I might remember it before the end of the episode. I might not. But so the main point is that as we have talked about in other episodes, we want to be as inclusive as possible. And for our differently abled friends, it can be really hard for them to feel included. So, if we can start thinking more broadly about what inclusion looks like, and it not just being sort of the typical things we think of, race, gender, religion, national origin, et cetera, but always making sure that we're considering ability, disability, different abilities, then we are going to come a long way towards making our workplaces more inclusive. So, Trish, any final thought from you?
Yeah, as a person who grew up with parents that worked in the mental health and social health fields, I do want to say if you haven't had the opportunity to spend time with differently abled individuals, spend some time with them. You want to talk, and again, there's so much you can learn about grace, about stamina, about growth. And I'm not saying specifically like, oh, point people out, put them on a pedestal or anything like that. I'm just saying if the reason that you have these biases are fear or lack of understanding, really get to know individuals. Talk to someone, ask for guidance. I feel like we talk about that with pregnancy a lot. Like you let your pregnant person guide. It would be the same thing with your differently abled individuals. Ask them to guide you in the process. Keep yourself in check in every single form. I know I do all the time. Check myself. Why am I thinking that? Is this a bias? Am I having an impact on someone without realizing it? So just be aware and be kind. Be
Yeah.
human. Try to be the best
Yeah.
human you can be.
So, of course, I have a different thought, which was not point two, but it's a different one. But I just want to link this to what we talked about in our one of our recent episodes, about bystander intervention. Because if you hear a conversation happening where you feel like somebody is speaking in biased terms. And again, a lot of times that's unintentional. It's not malicious. They may not even realize they're doing it. But if in that moment you can stop them and say, can you just clarify what you mean by what you just said? Or can you please, like, I think we should be focusing on this person's performance, not on their disability. Just redirecting the conversation in a very polite, respectful way, but making sure that it happens in the moment. That is so important. And then, as we discussed in that episode, that second or third person who can speak up and say, yeah, I agree. We need to be focusing on this. We really need to check and make sure that our bias isn't coming into play. Then those conversations are so crucial because, as we started from at the beginning, it's just so easy to fall into an ability bias perspective.
And with that, I want to change our word to predation. Predator. My wine. Julie! I
Still
know I'm
loving
making
it?
a. I'm loving it. I think this is a really great wine. I'm super, super happy with it. And I love their concept and obviously being better for the earth because, you know, me and bees. We got to
Yep.
protect the bees at all costs.
Yep.
What about for you?
I am loving mine as well. I don't think I ever said the name of it. It's Contenera, Cottanera. Chef's kiss. Love it.
Love it. Awesome.
All right. On that note, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Wine with HR. We hope you learned some things, particularly from my own mistakes in the past. And I hope that maybe you view things a little bit differently going into work on the next day that you return to work. So, as always, we appreciate you, Wino, so much.
Follow us on social media, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, share with your friends, encourage them to follow, and let us know if there's anything that you would like us to talk about in the future. Cheers!